Hello, and welcome to the Monster Mechanics podcast, where we dissect creatures of myth and media to see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me, as always, is the Simon to my Garfunkel, Zach Jaquays. Zach, what's today's episode?
Today, we're talking about Illithids.
All right, great. And for those of us who are maybe not total D&D nerds, what are Illithids?
So they are a empire of brain-eating monsters from the Underdark.
Okay. They are probably one of the weirder creatures in D&D, right? They have tentacle mouths. They reproduce by taking over other creatures, right?
So they're all about brains, eating brains, infesting brains, dominating other creatures.
So let's sort of think about how these guys will structure into a world. They're residents of the Underdark.
They are.
Which means that they, unlike in this world, this is a massive cave system in most D&D worlds, right? Like absolutely globe-spanning Underdark.
Oh,
right? Yeah. Okay. They have no shortage of food, I guess is the way I'm thinking out of it. So if I remember correctly from the Monsters Manual, they have to eat intelligent brains.
They have to eat intelligent, living brains.
So these guys are not just apex predators. They have to take on absolutely like living human people or something equivalent, dwarves or drow or something else.
They aren't all that piggy when it comes to their food sources as long as it's intelligent.
So the immediate question that comes to me is, what is it about intelligent creatures that satisfies their hunger?
It may just be brain composition, or perhaps they're getting sustenance from the memories within.
I like that idea of the sustenance from the memories within, because if we're thinking biologically, there's not really any difference between an intelligent creature's brain and an unintelligent creature's brain, just chemically, structurally, anything like that.
Sure.
At least not when you ingest it. So it's got to be something about intelligence. I like memories. Memories is good.
Well, when you consider that their sort of deities are these things called elder brains.
Those aren't just deities, though, too. That's part of their biology, right?
It is. It's actually a collection of Mind Flayer brains of the past. It just absorbs the memories and abilities of previous Mind Flayers.
Okay, so here's an interesting take on it. If we stick with memories, maybe they actually use the memories themselves as a sort of fuel source.
Interesting.
So they have to ingest new ones because they're constantly burning memories in order to power themselves. Like these are powerful psionic creatures, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in order to use any of the magic that makes them powerful and keeps them alive, they are constantly consuming the memories of themselves, the things they contain within them. And by extracting them from another creature, they refill that sack inside of them.
Memory sack.
I like sack is a great word because you can just imagine this thing with the tentacly mouth, like injecting its words directly into your head, saying like, "I need you for my memory sack." Right? Like that's great.
Oh, that's horrible.
Horrible is good. These are terrifying creatures. They should be horrible.
They are living nightmares.
Okay, so I like that idea that they actually have to take those memories in, which means it presents some interesting opportunities if they're denied food source, because it means that over the coming weeks, let's say, of the last time they feed, first they consume the newest memory, the redundant things that it doesn't need, all of the personal memories of that intelligent creature. Maybe if it's taken something on useful like spells or intelligent knowledge, it'll say, okay, I'm going to keep that myself. But then at a certain point, it might have to start making decisions about, oh, well, I'm out of other memories to burn. I'm going to have to use some of my own or some of the knowledge that's valuable, right? That creates a vulnerability for the creature, these otherwise terrifying monsters, that you could actually create some interesting story aspects out of. The longer that they're away from their hive and away from a food source, the weaker they become.
So that kind of raises an interesting idea, is like if you have these starving Mind Flayers that are now also suffering from dementia, so to speak.
They might lash out and become even sort of more feral.
Feral Mind Flayers roaming the Underdark sounds absolutely terrifying.
Well, and because when they're in their enlarged group, they share a hive mind. Is that right?
I believe so, at least through their elder brain.
Right. They get cut off, or even, I think that creates some Mind Flayer lore. That when they get expunged from their community for whatever reason, if they have bad thoughts, then they get pushed out. And this is the fate that they know that they're going to suffer, is becoming the feral version of themselves.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And that's the looming fear that holds over them the whole time. I like that idea a lot.
That would add definitely a sense of desperation. And so if you have this desperate Mind Flayer who's now hunting sentient creatures just to keep itself sane.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And Mind Flayers, I mean, once they're pushed out of the colony, they have no hope of living outside of it. Well, I mean, they can live their own lifespan, but they're not going to be able to breed, right? Because they need the elder brain tank.
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, so let's do a little bit of lesson in the Mind Flayer life cycle. Just a broad overview. We have the main Mind Flayer, the Illithid,
Sure.
which is the size of a regular whatever creature it took over when it became itself. So it'll be the size of a man or an orc or an elf, and it has like a squid head on top of that with the tentacles coming out where its mouth was. All right, so that's the normal one. I forget exactly how they produce the tadpoles.
They are considered to be hermaphroditic creatures.
Okay.
And 2 to 3 times during their life cycle, they will spawn these tadpoles.
Okay. And so the tadpoles are put into the pool of the elder brain.
A vat of cerebral fluid, I believe.
Ew, that's so gross. I love it. Okay. I have to say, they vomit these tadpoles into the elder brain vat because that's just the worst possible way for them to deposit them. Okay. So they vomit this, just a slurry of tadpoles.
Oh, God.
And the tadpoles are a food source for the elder brain, right? Well, maybe that's one version that I read, but I like the idea that that's how they keep the elder brain fed.
I'm picturing Jabba the Hutt with those little tadpole newt things he has that he snacks on.
Maybe that, but the tadpole from Jabba the Hutt's a good way to think about it because they are sort of this huge immobile thing that bosses everybody else around. Mm-hmm. So these little tadpoles, for the most part, they produce however many of them. Most of those don't go on to become full illithids. They're only occasionally selected. Mm-hmm. And when they want to make a new full-size illithid, they've already had these things sort of in a stock.
Yeah.
And then they want to make a new one. So they grab a living, intelligent creature, usually a human or a drow or a underdark dwarf or something.
But it's not limited to just humanoid creatures.
We'll get to that in a second. So, but the standard version is they bring these out and they let the tadpole climb inside that thing's head.
Mm-hmm. Usually through the ear canal.
Ear canal is good. I think up the nose is also really good because there's that soft tissue in there and like that. Yeah, okay.
If you really want to go for the body horror, you could go through eye sockets or just about anything else.
Yeah, that's true. I think nose, ears, eye sockets are all valid targets because these little guys have chompy teeth, I bet.
Oh, yeah, I'll bet.
You could hear the chewing.
I've often heard it described as like a beak, like an octopus.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So then it goes in that it eats the brain from the inside out, right? And then, or something along those lines.
Yeah, it nests within the brain and can occasionally, in doing so, gain the memories of its host. It's rare, but it happens.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So it mostly destroys the brain. Maybe it keeps a little bit around. And then it overtakes the head of the original creature. Mm-hmm. And I think even does modify the body somewhat.
Oh, yeah. It becomes weird, gross, rubbery, aquatic, amphibian kind of thing.
And so that's how you get new illithids. But then at a certain point, as it grows older, the illithid joins with the elder brain, right?
Towards the end of its life cycle.
Right. And I don't think I heard how that process was described. So maybe that's something we can give some thought.
When a illithid dies, its brain is removed and given to the elder brain. This is supposed to be sort of like uploading your conscience to the clouds and gaining immortality that way.
Okay.
But the dark secret of the illithids that the elder brains don't tell you is you don't gain that immortality. It gains your memories.
Okay. Yeah. You're not brought into the hive mind. You're not part of it.
You're just more food.
Okay. So, but because this elder brain stage of life is such an important part of the illithid's life cycle, if it's on its own and it doesn't have an elder brain, mm-hmm. It's done. It doesn't have any descendants. Mm-hmm. It's not going to form a new illithid community. That's excellent. I like that idea.
It's the end of its legacy, so to speak.
Right. All right, let's get a little bit into the nitty gritty. They eat brains, so they've got to get access to those brains. Now, they're very intelligent, so that we can imagine they have tools. Mm-hmm. So a cultured Mind Flayer might, peel back the flap of the skin and then get a bone saw in and pull the cap off the top of your skull and then slowly eat. Maybe there's a whole bunch of them gathered around with spoons or something.
Well, I'm not going to be sleeping well tonight.
But they didn't always have tools. So at the feral stage, they can still get access to brains, right? Mm-hmm. So that means they have to either go in through the skull itself, which is the strongest part of most creatures' bodies. It's a case of bone because brains are so important that they have to be protected. There are some weak points. Maybe they have these tentacles for their mouths, which I've always imagined as being kind of soft. But there's no reason that has to be completely true. Maybe at the end of each of those tentacles, you've got something kind of like a hard tissue.
Have you seen vampire squid?
Yeah, with the hooks.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so something along those lines. So they might be able to just punch through the thinner areas.
Mhm.
So, you can imagine one of these things having caught you and is holding you down and pushed like the same way that it does with its tadpoles. It might choose a soft spot of your skull, and just a tentacle might just be pushed in and crack through the skull at that point. Between those tentacles, inside of that cluster, there's got to be a beak. Is that Okay, so I'd always imagined it like a lamprey's mouth. A circular row of teeth.
Oh, that's nightmarish.
Which I think is worse than and there could be multiple subspecies of illithids, right?
Oh, sure.
Okay, so maybe there's beaked ones. I like the lamprey one because that gives them a second option for the brain, which is that they just sort of put that ring on the skull and then just start like
a glass cutter.
Yeah, like a glass cutter, just sawing back and forth until they
that's
have a hole that they can just get right in there. Maybe slurp the whole thing out like a Jello shot. Just
please never make that noise again.
I think that's great. I mean, these are supposed to be terrifying creatures, and I have to admit, the artwork for them always makes them look a little bit dopey.
Yeah, a little bit.
But when you think about the implications of the way they interact with their world, I think they're legitimately terrifying.
They really are. One of the things I want to talk about is what they have guarding the elder brains.
Okay, we talked about this just briefly. The idea that when you have tadpoles, you don't have to put them into an intelligent creature. You have a whole menu, a smorgasbord of options, right?
Well, this is even a little bit different than that.
Okay.
They have something called brain golems.
Okay.
Where they use parts of the elder brain to create these creatures of sentient brain matter that now imagine any other species using their food as a golem. You might have a ham sandwich golem.
The meat golem.
Yes.
Oh.
I mean, technically, I suppose we have flesh golems, so that's not too far off the mark.
Yeah, but I mean, cerebral tissue isn't known for its like strength and mobility.
I have a feeling it's one of those. It sounds good in theory until you start breaking it down.
Yeah, this seems like a ripe area to improve, actually, because brains aren't scary. Like, they're big, soft things. You should be able to punch a brain golem and put your fist like right through it, right?
Sure, yeah.
Maybe it's like, what do they do with the rest of the creature? Like, maybe this is all nerve, like peripheral nerve tissue they've pulled out of creatures. Like, you crack open the spinal cord. Oh man, spinal columns themselves are pretty good, actually. Okay, so let's say you extract the brain and the spinal column all in one unit.
Oh, very predator.
Yeah, very predator. But like, it's a unskulled brain. It's unwrapped. They've shelled the brain and gotten to the gooey center, or shelled the head and gotten to the gooey center.
Do you think they have like a skull hammer like you have for crabs?
No, I think it's the Nutcracker style with the two.
Oh, yeah.
Like where you've got the hinge and the two sections that go together. Yeah. Okay, so they've unshelled the brain, and then you've got the spinal cord is still wrapped in vertebrae, and maybe even some like remnants of muscle. And then you take several of these brains and you join them together at the brain. And so what you have is a creature which is one big fat brain in the middle, made up of like the still semi-conscious like minds that were inside originally. And then its appendages are tentacles made of spinal cords.
That seems like a super hardcore grell.
Grell? Okay,
tell me. So grells are basically these giant floating brains with a beak and tentacles.
Yes, I remember these now.
But having spinal cords for tentacles sounds metal as
I like that. I mean, if you turned a corner and you saw one of those, as opposed to just a big guy made out of brain, I mean, frankly, Krang is more scary than just a big brain guy.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so that's one option for, they just make these brain golems.
Yeah.
Right, this is a construct.
Yes.
But they have all of the other options for creatures that they can take their tadpoles and put them into. Do you want me to pull up the list of illithid creatures? Okay.
So I know one of the main things they do when a tadpole isn't selected for the creation of a Mind Flayer, like these tadpoles will just kind of flop around in the cerebral fluid and they'll eat each other. And usually like the last one surviving, if it's never put into sentient brain to become a Mind Flayer, grows to become this sort of squid-faced tentacle monster called a neothelid.
A neothelid. Yes, it's described here as a worm-like creature with illithid tentacles at the forefront of its body and immense mental powers. See, I'm not wild about the idea of it having immense mental powers if it has never been fed actual brain. If it has only ever lived off of other dumb, I mean, these are animal level intelligence tadpoles. I think it would make a little bit more sense if it was still animal intelligence itself. Although, can you imagine the idea of an animal level intelligence that also has intense like psionic and psychic powers? So it's got nothing to direct that raw power with. It just uses it like a battering ram.
Just instinctually.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Okay, so here's some of the related creatures. We may not go through all of these. I'm going to pick out some of the good ones. But so the top of them is the brain golem. I don't think we can talk about the brain stealer dragon, which is a mix of illithid and dragon, because that might be a whole episode into itself. That is terrifying.
That is, a living nightmare. That's when your DM hates you.
The Kesreth is a living troop transport and battle platform created from the severed head of a shamed illithid.
How bad do you have to be for them to turn your head into an APC?
Oh man, that's gross.
So maybe we should kind of move away from the actual list and focus on things like what would be the worst thing to turn into an illithid-based creature.
Okay, so looking at this list, I see that they have a large number of Underdark creatures.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about maybe surface level creatures.
Yeah.
So let's see. Dragon, of course, is the obvious choice. Well, they're awful.
Just about anything flying would be terrifying.
Oh, yeah. So you can imagine even just something like an Arakoa, right? Like a Birdman that has a tentacle head and can just swoop down on you.
Oh yeah, that'd be awful.
That's
or
not good.
Kenku.
Yeah, Kenku, the same sort of idea. What about those? Isn't there a mantis man that has like blade arms?
Mantis man that has blade arms. Oh, the Thrycreen.
Yes, the Thrycreen. Okay. Yeah.
How does that even work when you have an exoskeleton
Well, they can get through a skull. I'm sure they can get through.
Sure.
I'm sure they can get through an exoskeleton. In fact, it's probably. I mean, if Thrycreens are based off mantis, they're pretty used to having their heads chewed off.
Okay, picture this nightmare.
Okay.
A turtle. Converted by an illithid.
Oh, I like that idea.
The little head pops out of the shell and then splits into 4 tentacles.
I think it doesn't have I think it uses that opportunity to not have the whole head come out. I think that the mass of the illithid skull stays within the shell the whole time, and you just get tentacles.
Oh god, that's
come out.
Some Cthulhu level nightmare shit.
Yeah, I like that. Oh, and maybe let's see, they wouldn't be able to see then. So, but they have psionic powers.
They do.
So they can use their their mind sense to see out with. I like that idea. Yeah, that's pretty nasty. So, what is it about illithids that keeps them from coming and taking over the surface?
Well, it kind of depends on the mythology. In certain variations on the lore, the illithid are these planet-spanning, it's this empire of illithid just across multiple planets, and they had thousands of slave races under their commands, and there was nothing to stop them.
Yeah,
at one point,
you're talking my jam now, because that's Spelljammer territory, which I absolutely love.
Oh yeah,
yeah. The galaxy-spanning empire of Mind Flayers is that's great.
It was considered that at one point the illithid empire got so vast and broad that the demons and devils considered ending their blood war to deal with the illithid threat.
I love it. Okay, so they have 2 environments in which they are most suited, and one is outer space, and the other is underground.
Sure.
Okay, so that means they are horribly agoraphobic.
Oh, I like that, yeah.
Okay, so because outer space, you're actually spending most of your time in a ship or on a station. And so that if they look out at the sky, that breaks their brain. There's something about trying to contemplating infinity.
Oh.
I like the idea that causes some sort of psychosis in them.
Interesting.
That's a neat idea. Okay, and that gives an excellent idea for not only why they don't like the surface world, but also means there is ways to circumvent that by building on the surface world and having agents that go out instead.
Sure.
So you can imagine a scenario where they figured out, this is how we want to take over the surface world. They've using wall of stone or something like that to create domes, terraforming the surface, and then capturing creatures, converting them with their tadpoles into Mind Flayer creations and sending those out as their agents.
So going back to them harvesting memories in their memory sack,
Mm-hmm.
what if harvesting these surface world memories gives them a sort of temporary inoculation as they sort of gain an understanding of the above ground world after they've taken these brains?
Yes, they're able to hold on to that sort of the mind state of being able to look up at the sky normally. Just that's normal. Like that's an idea that's just we're used to.
Yeah.
And they're able to take that in, but it's a kind of ephemeral thing. It's not one that they can hold on to forever.
Sure. Eventually they're going to burn that memory.
Exactly. And so for a while they're good, but eventually it's going to break down. So they have to harvest new creatures.
Yeah.
And they can't raise stock of their own to harvest. They can't because they need to be wild humans. They need grass fed or sky fed humans.
Oh, I like that.
Organic sky fed humans in order to. That's fantastic. I love that.
They can't replicate that in a slave pen.
No, you can't. I like the idea of taking this vulnerability to infinity and bringing it into their mythos, because they've got the elder brains as their kind of god kings, right?
Sure.
But they have to have something of a culture going on as well. And I like the idea that infinity might be their version of the devil.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like, I mean, because obviously, if we're taking straight D&D world or D&D cosmos, then they know about devils. Like, there's the concrete devil.
Sure, yeah.
But to them, there's something beyond that. There's something, the great king of all nothingness is infinity. Yeah. Okay, they're very smart, and they've been around a long time. So very far back in the Illithid history, they realized the idea of the heat death of the universe. And at some
going hard sci-fi with this. Okay,
I like the idea of mixing hard sci-fi and fantasy.
Oh, sure.
Because especially if we're talking something like Spelljammer, at some point in the past, a great Mind Flayer of the past, a great Illithid scientist, realized, okay, the universe is going on and on and on, and it doesn't have an end, because that would make it finite. And if it goes on forever, eventually there's a point where all of the entropy just catches up, where all of the potential energy in the whole universe has just broken down by friction, and there's nothing but heat left. And there is no way to solve this. There is nothing that fixes this problem.
I like the idea that maybe the one who came up with this revelation was like the first elder brain.
Yes, the first brain.
Yes.
The first brain's a good name. Maybe elder brains aren't part of their natural life cycle. Maybe that was something that was created at some point. That they lived in this twofold version of themselves, where they had stage 1, which is tadpole, stage 2, which is illithid. And they would just sort of keep vats of these tadpoles around and use them as like a delicacy and a food source, and then occasionally use one to make a new Mind Flayer. And then some community comes up with the idea of, actually, it wouldn't be a community. It would be one guy. It would be one illithid who figures out, oh, I could be a big brain in a vat.
Yeah.
But he needs other illithids to join in with him. So he comes up with the myth of them becoming the hive mind. But he knows that he's just going to be, I'm just going to take over, and I'm going to be super smart, and I'm going to have all of their knowledge.
Sure.
And he tricks them all and becomes the first brain.
I like it.
I like this idea. Okay, so there's a way to write a whole mythos around this about the idea of the first brain, And there's 2 versions of the legend, right?
Yeah.
There's the one that you tell the little illithids in bed at night.
Illithid bedtime stories is just
Except of course they wouldn't have them, because they come into adulthood like immediately. They're full grown.
Yeah, but eat your heart out, Grimm's fairy tales.
Okay, but there's the one version, which is when a community of illithids came together and created the first brain.
Yeah.
And there's the other one, which you are told when you become a new elder brain. Like when a new elder brain is created, it's told the great secret, which is that when they came together, only one mind took over all the rest. And that this is a secret, the great secret that's been passed down from elder brain to elder brain for all of time.
Sure.
And there's 2 versions of the story. I love that idea. But that first brain is the one who sat and thought and contemplated the end of the universe and discovered the great, I don't want to say the great evil, because these guys are very evil. They wouldn't think of it as evil.
They could call it like the end of memory or something.
End of memory is a good phrase.
So another one of the various versions of where the Illithids came from is that they're actually from the end of time, as it were, and that they traveled back in time 2,000 years before whenever your particular D&D campaign started. And they have sort of integrated themselves into the past of every culture.
Okay. I like that idea. That's using time. That fits right into this idea of trying to escape the end of the universe by traveling through time. Yeah. But that doesn't work forever.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like there's only, you can keep going back, but it creates a spiral. Yeah. But a spiral is still infinite.
Ooh.
Oh God. They would, if they also hate spirals, then they would really hate that Junji Ito book about them.
Who doesn't hate that though?
Oh man, that guy is just to take a slight aside, that guy is a master of taking something which should not be scary and making it absolutely horrifying.
It really is just unsettling.
If I could be half as scary as him, I would be very happy. Because I like coming up with these disturbing ideas. If I could do half as well as Junji Ito. So it's interesting because if they're scared of infinity, if they're scared of the end of everything, then their primary purpose is just to survive? Or is there some greater aspect to the Illithid?
Are they trying to solve entropy?
Maybe.
Are they just this really far-thinking, ultimately altruistic race?
No, they're definitely not ultimately altruistic. They are absolutely
brain-eating nightmares.
They're brain-eating nightmares. They're doing this for their own benefit.
Oh, yeah.
And so maybe they're trying to solve the great imbalance, which is that they hate other living creatures, especially intelligent ones. They hate them. They can't stand that they exist, but they need them to exist because they need them to feed on.
Sure.
And so maybe that's that's one of the big struggles for them, is the idea of like, how do we solve this problem of we can't eradicate our food source, but we can't stand to have them around either.
So what if the Illithid hate these surface creatures and really all other creatures who literally just don't have this concept of how terrible infinity is, and it's sort of almost an opiate to them, where they get this memory of just forgetting how bad things are.
Oh, that's lovely. So there's so their version of eating a lot of turkey and going into a food coma is instead the first thing they consume out of a mind when they are eating it is just the peace of not knowing.
Yes. Feasting on ignorance.
Yes. That the first thing that they eat is just the comfort that we feel because we don't have this existential dread that they feel.
Yes.
And so you can just imagine it in Illithid's eyes rolling back in its head, and maybe like its little tentacles quivering as it's just like, oh, that's the best, right? that is legitimately terrifying and like identifiable. Like there's something about that which is strangely making them more human is not making them better because they still want to eat brains.
Oh yeah,
and they get great pleasure from it, and it gives them an ecstasy that's not in any way sexual. They just live to consume. Yes. And are a little bit like drug addicts. Like, oh, I got to get that sweet brain juice in between my tentacles so that I can feel the sweet relief of not knowing.
Yes. Why wouldn't that work with unintelligent creatures then? You would think that would give them maybe a greater sense.
That's a good question. We've decided why they need intelligent creatures is because intelligent creatures form memories and thoughts and sort of concepts within their brain. And unintelligent creatures just kind of don't, you know. Maybe if you ate a dolphin, you're going to get like 80% of what you get from a human, but eating a dog that doesn't satisfy.
Maybe it's more that they feed off humans' ability to thrive with like cognitive dissonance, where they can know one thing but not deal with it. Or
that's a bit more esoteric than memory.
That is true.
And I think I like memories. It's really, you could put that into a monstrous manual and kind of explain it. If you're trying to give people the idea that they feast off knowing one thing but also knowing another thing at the same time, that's a bit esoteric. But I do like the idea that the ignorance is a drug for them.
Yes.
Okay, I like this. That not fearing infinity, that ignorance only exists when the mind is whole. When you first consume it, you get a great big hit off of that ignorance. And that's when all the pleasure comes.
Mhm.
But as you start consuming the memories and breaking it apart, the gestalt of that idea breaks down. And so they're still eating those concepts. They're still eating the memories and everything. That's what provides them their magical sustenance.
Sure.
But it no longer has that drug-like effect. And because an animal creature isn't complex enough, a dog doesn't understand affinity.
Sure.
And therefore, because it doesn't understand it, there's no hit off of it not fearing it. There's no juice there for it. So it will eat one of those things. It'll get some regular sustenance from it. Maybe that's how these feral illithids we're talking about might stoop to surviving that way.
Oh yeah.
Is that they'll kill animal creatures, but it's like a vampire draining the blood from a rat. It'll get them a little bit longer, but it won't really sustain them.
It's the nutrient paste of.
Yes, it's Soylent.
Yes.
Or Bachelor Chow.
So there's some other aspects that are kind of interesting that are already defined, and they have the Alhoon, which I believe are lich based.
Oh, that's when an illithid wants to become a lich.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is an illithid which forgoes joining the elder brain.
Yes. And searches immortality in his own way.
This is interesting. Maybe this is what happens with an illithid learns the great secret of the elder brains.
That is a possibility.
Do they still eat brains?
I believe they still eat brains. I don't know. Can you pull up the information on them?
Let's find out. Okay, so Alhoons are not true liches because there are also illiches. Illithiliches, which is terrible.
I just want to say we picked one of the worst words to start this podcast with.
That's why I've been trying to say Mind Flayer for the most part. Yeah, and why isn't that just Illith or Illich?
Because they got to get that multi-syllable monster.
Or like a Litholith or something. I don't know. I don't know. That is kind of ridiculous.
It's a lich-a-lurch.
It's a lich-a-lurch. Okay. Alhoons combine powerful wizardry and sorcery with their innate skill at psionics to become a new threat to the established order of the Underdark and beyond. They have achieved a limited form of lichdom, which I think is a kind of a cop-out, because I think lich has got to be all or nothing. Mm-hmm. If you can have demi-lich, there probably are demi-liches, aren't there?
Normally. Well, the demi-lich was always stated as being a more powerful form of a lich, which is...
So, semi-lich. There can't be semi-liches, is what I mean.
Yeah, I'm quarter lich on my mother's side.
Yeah, they're pretty much just not full liches, but they are magic users, and they're sort of half undead. Mm-hmm. I think this is something we could improve on, because that seems like a half-formed idea. I like the idea of the Alhoons and the Illith. I think they said Alhoon just because they didn't want to say Illithilich.
I wouldn't put it past them.
Illithilich.
I don't want to say Illithilich.
Yeah. Maybe this is just the natural progression of when an Illithid finds out the great secret about the Elder Brains.
Okay.
That, when I say natural, it's not like you learn it and then you immediately become an Alhoon, but rather that when they find out this secret, the Elder Brain who controls the hive mind of this unit immediately expunges that creature, right?
Sure,
because that's like an immune response. They're like, oh, it knows, and just immediately shoves him out.
Oh yeah,
which is hugely traumatic.
Because you can't hide secrets from the Elder Brain.
Exactly, and you can't hide. It's really difficult to hide secrets from the other Illithids too.
Yeah.
So the only thing you can do is just cut contact out completely, and then probably at that point, all the other Illithids are going to turn on this like.
Oh sure, yeah. Like antibodies.
Yes. So he's got to be pushed out, and normally that's a death sentence. So lots of times that somebody figures it out or has been written down.
They ate the brain of some surface researcher who's been looking into what actually happens with Elder Brains.
Yeah, or maybe it's just written in some books, which Illithids just don't read normally.
He just picks up a monstrous manual.
Hey, it says here that I've got 86 hit points, but now it knows there's another option. When for whatever reason an Illithid is normally pushed out of the hive mind, they become feral, right?
Yeah.
Like they all are almost, so slowly they're going to be reduced to sort of animalistic levels.
Yeah.
But this one now has an option.
Yeah.
And so some number of those are going to start seeking out other available. They're like, oh, okay, I don't have to just end. It's not the only option to join the hive mind. So I can look for additional ways to extend my life, to gain more power. And they might go to the sort of mortal options, which are things like lichdom.
Yeah. So the idea of becoming a lich is you live forever, right?
Mhm.
Maybe they might consider this embracing infinity.
Oh, this is their deal with the devil.
Yeah.
This is like going to the crossroads.
Yes.
Okay, I like that. Because lichdom is always about making the deal, giving up something very
it's
important.
sacrificing
Right.
for.
And now they really are going to live forever. They're guaranteed to see the thing they fear most, which is the entire universe coming to its heat death.
Sure, yeah.
They're going to come face to face with the end of memory.
Mhm.
But now that they're part of it.
Yeah.
So you can imagine a collection of Alhoons and Illithid liches who come together for this great purpose. That could be a counterbalancing against the Illithid Empire in the galaxy. You've got a separate group of Illithids who are on an individual level probably more powerful than your average Illithid because they've also got magical powers. They've got psionic powers. They are terrifying brain eaters, and they also can cast 9th level spells. So which is just not good.
Yeah.
So their entire philosophy is 100% opposed to the standard Illithid philosophy.
Oh, yeah.
And so they are naturally going to be to come to war to one another.
Oh, yeah.
I like that. I also like the idea of it's the secret. The secret of what happens to Illithids who join the Elder Brain is a mimetic warfare that telling other Illithids about it gets them immediately pushed out of their own hive mind. And so introducing that knowledge into a colony, if you do it in a good enough way, you can eradicate an entire colony of Illithids.
With simply an idea.
Yeah, it's like this is a stupid comparison, but there's a Monty Python sketch about the funniest joke ever created.
Yes, I'm aware.
They translate it into German and are reading it on the battlefield.
Oh, yeah.
So you can imagine okay, now this is an idea for an adventure right here. The whole point of why we're doing this is to come up with neat hooks. You could have an Alhoon using agents, in this case, maybe party members, to introduce this idea to a colony of Illithids, to have it written on paper or to...
This mind killer idea.
In fact, maybe he's betraying his own agents by telling them this secret, sending them into the colony, knowing that they're going to get killed and eaten. And that knowledge will then be spread amongst the Illithids.
Oh.
I like that. That's pretty cool.
And that gives you a very interesting adventure because it's not just the standard hack and slash, cast your fireballs and move on. You've got the secondary goal that you have to complete to wipe out this
a goal, and that goal could be kept secret or it could be part of it. You also might see some of the effects of it during combat. Let's say that you've got maybe one of your players gets killed and then eaten, and then the players might see what happens in the colony as the Illithids that fed on their friend's brain are immediately expunged and attacked by the other Illithids.
Ooh, I like it.
So all of a sudden there's this chaos. And so you could arrange for them to be captured. And either, if you don't want to sacrifice a player character, you could always have an NPC along for the ride, sacrificial, specifically for this purpose, and kill them off and let your players come to the conclusion on their own. You may have to end up explaining it to them because it's kind of esoteric.
But
that's a fantastic scene right there. And I love the idea that they've been hired by someone who is ultimately also a villain. There's no good people in this side. Killing Illithids, that's great.
That's par for the course in the Underdark.
Exactly. But at the same time, if you succeed, that Alhoon does not have good plans. You've probably increased his power in a way that is going to be bad for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
I love that idea. That is
on the other hand, you have potentially wiped out a colony of Illithids. So you've done at least a little bit of good.
Not if they all become Alhoons.
That's true.
I think that's much worse. But you can take that adventure in a lot of different ways, where the players might turn against the creature that hired them originally, or try to, wipe them out some other way. Or maybe they figure out a way to weaponize it themselves, and now the mortals have a great big stick that works against the Illithids.
Oh, yeah.
That they can use this information warfare in order to fight back against the terrifying creature. That's fantastic. That is a fantastic idea, and a really good hook. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I think on that note, I think we were at least done with this one episode about Illithids. We're going to have to circle back around in the future, but...
Definitely.
That is great. All right. I have not come up with a sign-off yet.
Well,
so...
here's us signing off.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Monster Mechanics. You can find links and episode notes at our website, monstermechanics.org.
If you'd like to support us, head on over to patreon.com/monsterpod. We'd love to hear your feedback. We can be reached on Twitter at MonsterMPod, or you can email us at monstermechanicspodcast@gmail.com. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by Scott Paladin. This episode was hosted by Scott Paladin and Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas generated in this episode are released on a do what the fuck you want public license.